The Scarred Gray Lady. September 1, 1942, the Western Mediterranean. The sea was a vicious, glittering blue, the kind that promised calm but held the threat of sudden violence. A brutal, sun-drenched expanse where every shadow seemed to harbor a U-boat, and every cloud was a potential host for a swarm of German or Italian aircraft. In the middle of this hostile azure, a vast gray lady, scarred by months of ceaseless war, drove eastwards. She was the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, Vicky to the men who lived and fought within her steel skin. And she was heading back into the cauldron of the central Mediterranean. The air on the flight deck was thick with the reek of high-octane fuel and the salty, acrid tang of the sea. Below the massive armored deck, the cavernous hangar bay thrived with activity. Mechanics, their overalls dark with grease and sweat, wrestled with the Merlin engines of the carrier Supermarine Seafire fighters, the navalized Spitfires, and the heavier Fairey Albacore torpedo bombers. The metallic clang of tools, the shouted orders, and the ever-present resonant hum of the ship's turbines merged into a symphony of controlled urgency. The officers and men of Victorious were exhausted, but buoyed by a fierce pride. They had just survived one of the most savage naval battles of the war, Operation Pedestal in August, where they'd fought tooth and nail to force a vital convoy through to the besieged island of Malta. They had seen their sister ship, HMS Eagle, torpedoed and sunk in minutes, and had watched as oil tankers, the prizes of the mission, were blown apart in pillars of fire. Victorious herself had absorbed a shocking 500-pound bomb hit from an Italian bomber, a near miss that had ruptured an oil tank and momentarily jammed her rudder, a terrifying incident that demanded a frantic scramble by the damage control teams to save the ship. Now, barely weeks later, Vicky was back. The strategic reality of September 1942 dictated it. Malta, the tiny, indomitable island fortress, was starving. It was the linchpin of Allied power in the Mediterranean, a permanent thorn in the supply lines of Rommel's Africa Corps fighting in North Africa. If Malta fell, the entire Allied position in the Middle East and the Suez Canal would be imperiled. The convoys were literally life-and-death missions, and as one of the few fully operational fleet carriers left in the Mediterranean, Victorious was indispensable. On the bridge, Commander Dennis Dizzy Boyd, the carrier's captain, gripped the railing of the compass platform. His face was weather-beaten and lined. His eyes, usually twinkling with the dry, ironic humor, were now watchful and drawn. "Report on the aircraft readiness, Mr. Stevens." Boyd's voice was crisp, cutting through the low murmur of the bridge staff. Lieutenant Commander Stevens, the flag lieutenant, leaned closer. "All aircraft armed and ready for deck park, Captain. 884 and 896 squadrons are fully fueled. They're running a mix of 250 and 500-pound armor piercing for the ground attack missions." Victorious was embarking on a unique and highly dangerous mission. The great naval convoys had paused, but Malta still needed a constant injection of reinforcements. This time, Vicky was acting as a high-speed ferry, carrying the precious Supermarine Spitfire fighters that would launch near the island and fly the last perilous leg themselves. This operation, codenamed Baritone, and later to be followed by Operation Stone Age in the coming weeks, required Victorious to sail deep into the most dangerous waters of the Mediterranean, closer to Axis air bases than any other capital ship dared to go. Boyd scanned the horizon. The escort force was minimal, a testament to the strain the Royal Navy was under. A few destroyers and cruisers, their gray paint peeling, their guns ready, were all that stood between the Victorious and the might of the Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica. "The enemy knows we're coming," Boyd stated, not as a warning, but a simple statement of fact. "The intel intercepts suggest the usual welcome. Their air patrols will be out in force. The moment we launch the Spitfires, they'll know where we are, and they'll come for us." He turned to the navigation officer. "Maintain course and speed. The wind is holding steady. We'll need a perfect run to get those Seafires and the Spits airborne quickly. The American contingent on board Victorious watched the preparations with professional fascination. The Royal Navy's carriers, with their heavily armored flight decks and massive island structures, looked radically different from the vast wooden-decked carriers like Saratoga or Enterprise.
The relationship between the two navies, now firm allies, was growing stronger by the day, particularly after the U.S. had begun to take the strain in the Pacific. In the ready room, Sub-Lieutenant Jack "Rocket" Riley, a young pilot from Manchester, adjusted the straps of his parachute harness. He flew a Seafire MKIC, a nimble but often temperamental machine that had a terrifying tendency to swing violently on landing, a challenge unique to the early naval Spitfires. "Hope we see some of those new Focke-Wulfs today," muttered Riley's wingman, a cocky South African named Peter Van Zyl. "Heard they're fast, but they break up easily if you're quick on the stick." A veteran lieutenant commander, a hardened survivor of the Norwegian campaign, leaned over. "You'll be wishing for the easy ones, Van Zyl. The Machis are faster than you think, and the Jerry boys and the Messerschmitts are fighting for their lives. This is no milk run. We're deep in the enemy's backyard. Protect the ship above all else. If Vicky goes down, those Spitfires don't get to Malta, and the island starves." Riley felt a familiar, cold knot in his stomach. The threat wasn't just the enemy. It was the vast, unforgiving sea, the complexity of landing a fast fighter on a moving deck, and the sheer, exhausting pace of war. Victorious was a machine of war, a floating airfield that had already seen the Arctic, the Atlantic, the pursuit of the Bismarck, and the crucible of Malta. In September 1942, she was a crucial, heavily burdened ship, and her small, dedicated crew knew that their success or failure over the next few weeks would directly impact the fight for North Africa and possibly the entire course of the war. As the sun climbed higher, turning the Mediterranean into a blinding shield of glass, the klaxons blared the call to action stations. The first wave of fighters, a protective screen of Seafires, was already being pushed onto the massive deck lift. The time for caution was over. Victorious was about to open her throttles and plunge into the danger zone once more. The guns were manned, the mechanics stood by their engines, and the Grey Lady braced herself for the fight to come. The fate of Malta and thousands of British and American troops across North Africa rested on the success of this one perilous high-speed dash.